The Rebels begin to ascend up the standings. The trade deadline begins to appear on the horizon, and a big heavyweight tilt is on deck Saturday night. The Junior Beast Pod hits now.
That's Klucha, and he goes short side low.
The Rebels are right back in it. All alone, he's stopped by Luke West. And Kerr,
What?
7 seconds is all it took for Kerr.
Quick shot scores. Jacob Goudreau.
Takes a shot and buries that.
Already into week 8 of the regular season, and as we move into mid-June, the playoff races begin to heat up. Keenan, how are you doing? And welcome into the pod.
Hey, I'm doing good. I got your score recap for you for week number 7 of action from across the RMLL Junior B Tier 1 division. Starting on Thursday the 6th, Rebels taking down the Crude, the only matchup that night, 10-8 final score in favor of the Rebels. Moving on to Friday, 3 games. Kings taking out the Warriors in the first of their set of 3, 11-8. Shamrocks, after dropping 4-1 at the end of the first, come back and storm back with a 12-4 victory over the Marauders. And the Mounties, a 15-3 victory over the Rockies. Action-packed Saturday, Outlaws and SWAT had a pair of games. Outlaws taking them both. 16-5 and 13-3 final scores there. Crude make a trip down to Airdrie as they take on the Silvertips. Silvertips come away with the victory, 11-1. Kings and Warriors, game 2 of their 3-game set, 13-8 in favor of the Kings. Rampage visiting the Mounties, 14-10 final score for the Rampage. Marauders take out the Rockies, 19-4. Chill and Blizz in the first of their 3-game set, a 13-13 tie, followed by an 8-7 victory for the Chill. And on Sunday, Kings and Warriors played their third of 3. Kings take the weekend sweep, 13-9, your final score. Outlaws taking out the SWAT, 12-11 in the third game of that 3-game set. The Outlaws with the sweep there against the SWAT. Rebels, 8-6 in that heater from Moyer Recreation Center on Sunday. Blizz, 12 over the Chill 4. That was the third of the 3-game set. 1-1-1 in that 3-game set. Not often you see that. And the Mavericks taking out the top of the Central, 9-5 victory over the Silvertips.
Thanks, Keenan, for that recap. And with that, let's get into some division talk. And we'll start in the north here, as there's a little bit of news coming out of Beaumont. Coaching change as the Outlaws decide to move on from Phil Smythe. And with that, assistant coach and assistant GM Kevin Hobday has moved into the head coaching role. And they go to Saskatoon over the weekend and get a big sweep over the SWAT, winning games 16-5, 13-3, and 12-11. And that's massive for their playoff hopes. They all but solidified that third and final playoff spot in the North. And I think nobody was more frustrated or disappointed to see that than the Crude, who are obviously trying to chase them down. And in those 3 games, listen to this consistency from Carter Grace. 4 goals, 2 assists. 4 goals, 2 assists. 4 goals, 1 assist. As he goes off for 12 in the 3-game set. Eric Tompkins also getting a hat trick in the 12-11 win. So in that tight game, he comes through and helps the Outlaws get a big sweep over the weekend. AP Josh Weston of the SWAT also steps in and scores 4 goals in that game, but unfortunately it was not enough. The Outlaws get a huge set of wins there as they look to nail down that final playoff spot in the North. Now the Rebels and Crude, they met on Thursday night, and in that 10-8 win, it was the Rebels coming through later in the game. They had some extended power play time. I thought Jordan Peck played quite well. A lot of shots in on top of his net. And Flodchuk did have a hat trick, but it wasn't enough for the Crude to come through, and that was a game they needed like blood. The Rebels coming out on top there. And the Rebels also get a huge 8-6 win over Red Deer. So that's a couple of big wins for them over that period of time. And the guys that they need to produce are doing so. And they come back from a 5-1 deficit after the first for the second time in the last 8 days. They also did that at the Crude last Friday night, and I did watch the third period of that game. And granted, Red Deer was in a tough scheduling spot, having played Calgary, playing the Mountaineers the day before, and then playing an early game against the Rebels. And they looked like they ran out of gas. They couldn't even they weren't getting shots on net. They were settling from shots from well out, and they weren't moving the ball. And I thought the Rebels really suffocated them in that third period and allowed them to come back. Seth McKenzie with a beautiful behind the back goal in that one. And he also had another goal when I look at the box score, it looks like they didn't give him, but I swear I saw him score another goal in transition. Either way, the Rebels come through and they now sit first in the North, which is massive for them. And it looks like if you really break down the schedule, Keenan, they meet up with the Warriors a couple more times, and the Warriors are going to need to probably win and tie or win both to surpass them for first in the North, which I don't really think I need to get it too much into the importance of that. Both teams much better at home than they are on the road, especially the Warriors, who have yet to win a game on the road. Now, granted, we'll get into this in a few minutes, but they typically have been a lot shorter and a lot more undermanned on the road, but still the fact remains they are 0-5-1 now on the road, and you got to think that home floor will matter if those two teams were to meet in the North Final. Crude, meanwhile, continue to struggle, and they are now down a couple offensive players due to other commitments, injuries, and other factors. As I mentioned, Fodchuk picks up that hat trick in the Rebels game, and I would look for some trades maybe to be made out of there, Keenan. I know, especially with what happened with the Outlaws taking all 3 games in Saskatchewan, I'd watch out for Fodchuk. I think that's going to gain some serious steam as we near, 2 weeks from the deadline. And there's a few teams interested. I know the Crude aren't really interested in making a deal unless it's a rental. So we'll see how that progresses. And I think it's important for people to keep in mind that you can only really make trades inside your division because player for player is extremely rare. And, only teams within your division have draft capital that they can move to you. So we'll see how that storyline develops. But I do know there are teams interested in him, and he could be moved for the second year in a row.
I could
Now
definitely
the Warriors,
see it after the Crude made that trade last year for the rental to the Rebels. It almost makes me wonder if, the Warriors are on the outside looking in for that first place spot. It makes me almost wonder if the Warriors are a prime destination for somebody like a Fodchuk to go to.
yeah, definitely a possibility. And speaking of the Warriors, they go play that high octane Kings offense in Regina over the weekend, and they take only 17 runners, 2 being affiliates. No Josh Stewart, no Luke Royer, no Liam Elliott, couple of defenders missing as well. And they felt it as they get swept by scores of 11-8, 13-8, and 13-9. And as I mentioned, they dropped to 0-5-1 on the road. And keep in mind, they were just 6-4 during their Founders Cup season a year ago, during the regular season on the road with a much deeper team. So they've always just been they've been a better team inside Bill Hunter Arena. But this year, that home road dichotomy has been greater than ever. Dickon does go off, scores a bunch of goals as you'd expect. Regan Carey continues his strong rookie season, but I thought their penalty kill really struggled from the portions that I saw, and they're just an undermanned team right now that are gonna need to get some things sorted out, and they're just gonna need more bodies around if they're gonna look to be a real threat. And as I mentioned, that North Division is really up for grabs now, and those 2 games remaining between the Warriors and Rebels are going to be massive as we head down the stretch as they fight for home floor in the North. So as we conclude the North talk, Keenan, any additional thoughts there?
I think my only additional thoughts would be, well, exactly that, is that those 4-point swing games between the Rebels and the Warriors are going to be 2 hot contests that I honestly think are going to be the most heated games that we've seen out of the North. So definitely, if you haven't already, circle on your calendars Friday, June 21st and Friday, July 12th, as those are the 2 times that they meet, home floor advantage for each of them once. I know I'll be watching both those games intently. Hell, I might even be calling one of them. But we'll I'm really curious to see how the North Division shakes up because right now, quite frankly, anyone's game still.
Yeah, so the playoffs should be interesting up here. Now let's move our attention over to the East, where the Queen City Kings. Listen, we know what this team is. We've talked about it at length, I think, on this podcast. They take advantage of a shorthanded Warriors team, and that's the sign of a good team pouncing when the opportunity strikes. And their power play also looks very good. Another sign of a quality team. There's things there that I think are very promising. McDonald flat out is an A player. I know I've talked to a few, or I've talked to a team in particular that they probably should be looking there. We'll see how that develops. But that kid can just flat out play. Lenz is another guy that's just an unreal shooter. Probably the most dangerous duo in the league right now. And so that always gives them a real good chance to, come out with wins. And so I thought that was pretty impressive that they didn't take their foot off the gas. They were able to get all 3 wins over the weekend. They stay in first while the Blizzard split their 3-game set, as you mentioned, with the Chill. They go straight down the middle, win, loss, tie. Not in that order. I think the first game was a tie, and then the Chill won the second game, and the Blizzard were able to win the concluding game. Andy Angus and Corbin Wiley hat tricks in the draw, while Ty Woods comes up with a big 4-goal performance in the 12-4 finale. They're sitting comfortably second in the East, and I consider them to be a real wild card within the league, capable of beating almost anyone. And I think it should be a good final out east between the Kings or likely between the Kings and the Blizzard, even though the SWAT, I do not believe, are mathematically eliminated yet. Any thoughts out east, Keenan?
Yeah, I think the Kings have been, I don't want to say asserting their dominance because it sounds kind of, not quite what I mean, but I think the Kings have absolutely been showing that they're ready to fight anybody that they want to once it comes to Larry Bishop time. I have a feeling that I do agree. I think the Blizz could take out anybody. But against the Kings, I don't know how that series would go. I mean, looking at box scores, I don't believe they've even met once this season yet between the Kings and the Blizz. I
They
believe
played
that's a
twice.
little later on.
They played twice. They split.
They did split. They
Yeah,
have
they played twice
two
in.
more meetings, it looks like.
Yeah, they played twice in Regina, so I'd imagine those games remaining are in Winnipeg.
Yes, I see that there. So I'm curious to see how that goes because, quite frankly, I think that series will go 3 games. I think it could be anybody's game, but I feel the Kings are a bit favored just based on how they're playing against other top teams out to the west.
Yeah, it should be a good matchup there in all likelihood as they battled out for the Eastern Crown and the right to play in the Larry Bishop. Now let's go to the Central, where the Silver Tips go and get a split over the weekend. They are able to soundly beat the Crude by the score of 11-1. And then they travel the next day into Mountain View and lose 9-5 to the Mavericks after the Mavericks go off in the second period. I believe outscoring them 4 or 5-0. And you know what? Overall, I know they took the loss on Sunday, but they're pretty consistent in what they bring. They're very good in tight games, which is a good sign for playoff lacrosse. But they don't do the other Central teams a favor losing that game Sunday. That was a huge win for the Mavericks in the big picture. Back to the Silver Tips, though, I really like Shawbuck's game. McDonough gives them an advantage in most games in net. I just think they're a flat-out contender. I think we know that by now, and I think the true test for them will come playoff time, where they have struggled, at least last year, disappointing effort against Red Deer. Speaking of Red Deer, they go to Calgary, get a 14-10 win over the Mounties, and got big outings from their big guns there, and then go Sunday and blow a lead to the Rebels. I talked a bit about that game already, and the rough scheduling spot for them. They look like they had not kind of ran out of gas in the third period there. Offense became sort of flat-footed. They did, however, I do want to sort of point out that since I kind of mentioned their offense had to get going a few weeks ago on the podcast, they've been scoring double digits almost every game. So I think that maybe they heard, maybe that was motivation. I don't know, but
You lit the fire.
yeah, maybe I don't know. But they do look like a completely different team offensively. So I think they've maybe figured some things out there. I think they've got a big weekend coming up here with a pair of games as they go to St. Albert Friday night and play the Blizzard at home on Sunday. Now, the Mavericks, who get that big home win 9-5 against the Silvertips, improving to 5-1 at home, another very strong home team. And that will obviously be a big factor, I think, in there. If they make the playoffs in that tough Central Division, I think home floor is massive in that 2-3. In a series that, assuming the Silvertips finish first, which it looks like they will determine who gets into the Larry Bishop as that second spot in the Central, because the Silvertips are hosting. So that's massive, I think, and something to watch for as we go down the stretch. It's clearly a tough place to play. Luke Hildebrandt, 5 goals, 6 points leading the way in that game. In a 9-5 game, that's pretty impressive. That's impressive no matter what, but in a game like that, even more so. And he has a history of this. If you look back, Keenan, he had a 7-goal game last year against the Crude, 2 hat-tricks previously this year, all at home against the Rampage and Marauders. So he's clearly a guy that really tends to go off inside that arena. And again, this is a team that knows its identity. They're really good at making other teams play at their pace and the style of game that they want to play. So they're going to be a tough team if they get into the playoffs, which it looks like they're in the driver's seat to do so right now. They're going to be a tough team for anyone to play, especially inside that barn. Now, trying to chase them down are the Chill. And as we mentioned, we talked a bit about that set over the weekend in Winnipeg. They really needed a second win on that trip. They're a team that they probably have the best offense in that division, which is a very good division, but probably the weakest defensive and goaltending combo, which has held them back a little bit. And now, just looking ahead, because I've looked ahead at for a lot of these teams and what they kind of need to do. They're in a position where they probably have to go 6-2 in their final 8 games to get in, which is going to be tough if you look at their schedule. But it's possible. Like they're going to probably have to beat the Mavericks both times, and then that'll go a long way in allowing them to get in. But they got a big weekend as well coming up with a pair of games. It's Friday night at home inside Brentwood against the Silvertips, and then they travel Saturday afternoon to the Outlaws. So that's the Central for you. Any thoughts there, Keenan, or anything to add?
Yeah, I think, and I've mentioned it a few times over the course of the season here on Junior Beast. I think the Central is the division that intrigues me most, simply because you have 4 points separating second from fourth. And like you said, if the Chill won in, they got to beat the Mavericks in those games. And again, you're looking at 4-point swing games. They win both. Like, let's say right now, hypothetically, they win both. They're tied 13-13. Mavericks would be ahead on games played, but it's that tight that 2 wins against a team that's ahead of you makes such a huge difference. And this is also another division that interests me a lot because every single team in this division is in the positives on their goals for and against. The Chill are only a +1, but it's very interesting to see how all the other ones, you got a couple minuses here and there on each of them, and then there's just the Central, who's that outlier. So I think the Central is going to be, I mean, again, and we've been saying it's the division of death. Teams are walking in here and losing. It's a matter of fact, and not even walking in. I mean, these teams are going there and somehow finding ways to win. And yeah, whoever gets the home floor advantage, I think honestly will be the ones who move on to the Larry Bishop alongside the Silvertips.
Especially if it's a Red Deer Maverick first round with a spot to go to the Larry Bishop and the provincials on the line. I mean, all of those guys are from that central Alberta area. I think that be quite a series to watch. A lot of familiarity. Two teams that I would imagine don't like each other, guys that grew up either playing with each other or against each other their entire lives. So if you're in that area and that ends up being the matchup, and again, I'm not writing off the Chill because they're a quality team. But if
Definitely.
that ends up being the matchup, then that is going to bode well for people that like intense, exciting lacrosse, especially with all that on the line. Now let's go down south where the Mountaineers did what they would have been expected to do and drub the Rockies 15-3 on Friday night. They do take a 14-10 loss at home the next day, the next afternoon to Red Deer, but Rory Dame, man, 8 assists in that game.
Oh, Phil.
Yeah, he goes off and eight. So he was involved in 8 of the 10 goals that they score. Rookie Dane Hansen hat trick as well. Unfortunately, not enough for the Mountaineers to come through. Good news for them though is that they still have a stretch of home games here coming up, and they're going to have a chance to gain some ground as they try to chase down the Marauders for second place and home floor in the first round of that, or in that division. I think 5 of their next 7 games come at home before their season finale at Lethbridge. Speaking of the Marauders, they go down to the Shamrocks 12-4, and they also beat the Rockies 19-4. So they don't have a lot, or there's not much to say really about them here. They continue to sort of be what I've said all season, dropping games to the heavyweights and typically beating up on teams they should. Believe their first round series with the Mountaineers will be close. I think a lot of it might come down to who's healthier and who gets better goaltending when the chips are down. Now, to wrap up the South talk, can't forget the Shamrocks. As I just mentioned, they rebound with a huge statement win, 12-4 at home over the Marauders. They get a plethora of large producers. Zane Fletcher goes off with 5 points, and that guy is just smooth around the net. Anytime you can watch him play, it is a sight to behold. Very, very just polished player, clean with the ball, makes a lot of plays, creates things for guys around. He makes guys around him better, which is also probably the biggest compliment you can give a player. And I think they go something. I think they're 10-1 now, I believe, and they sit comfortably up atop the South. And now that sets up a massive game coming up this Saturday. And I don't think I've ever plugged a specific game on the channel, but this Saturday, Bill Hunter, they take on the Warriors. They travel up to Edmonton. I don't know how many people realize this, but dating back to 2022 here, Keenan, the Warriors have actually taken the last 5 meetings between the two clubs. I know that they go back, I think so. I just have to pull this back up because I had it on my screen and now I lost it. But yeah, so if you go back to 2022, the Warriors have taken the last 5 meetings, 11-10 in OT. I was at that. I remember that game. The Warriors came back and tied it up late and then ended up winning in overtime, which was probably the best game all season, including the provincials that year. Then they took a 14-12 round robin game that year before beating the Shamrocks again 14-7 in the final to go off to the Founders, where they would end up getting bronze. Then last year at Bill Hunter, they met again, 13-5 Warrior win. And then last year in a game that basically was going to decide who was going to go to the Founders, the way the round robin played out, the Warriors able to get by with a 10-8 win. So that is the last 5 meetings with going the Warriors' way. So I'd look for maybe some extra motivation for the Shamrocks here. And you can watch that game live on Crowlax TV, 7 o'clock start in Bill Hunter Saturday night. Keenan, South thoughts.
South thoughts is Shamrocks are just trouncing everybody. It's pretty cut and dry how the South is going to turn out now. I think now that we're just past the halfway point of the season, you're going to have the Shamrocks up top getting that bye, and it's going to be Marauders and Mounties in round 1. So, I'm curious though, because Marauders and Mounties I feel could still go either way. But I'm very excited for that matchup of the Warriors and Shamrocks. And again, I agree. I don't think there's a time we've plugged a specific game, but that is going to be one to watch. And my eyes are going to be glued.
Yeah, no, it should be a good game. Two very well coached teams. Two teams that I think will bring their best, especially the Warriors coming off, a very tough weekend in Regina. They should have, the majority of their guys in the lineup ready to go. So I am looking forward to that one. Two teams that I think will bring their best Saturday night in Bill Hunter. Now, a couple more things that I just wanted to touch on here as we move past the halfway point of the regular season. First being if you look, there's a little bit of an interesting dichotomy going around in penalty minutes per game. And it's actually, the gap is pretty noticeable. If you look, the teams like the Shamrocks and the Silvertips are right around 11 minutes per game. And then you got teams near closer to the bottom of the standings, like the Crude at like 23, 24 minutes per game. But that's not like, it's not the end all be all. Like there's definitely no like direct correlation, because then you got the Kings even higher at 26.3. But it is interesting to note there are certain teams that look to play a lot more disciplined lacrosse. I know the Shamrocks have always been that way, really. The Silvertips look like they followed in that mold, both at 11 minutes per game. But then you got teams like, the Kings and Red Deer, who are also, I would say easily in the top half of the league, up above around 25, 26 minutes per game. So I just thought that was an interesting thing as we kind of move past the halfway mark of the season to point out. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on, Keenan, is scheduling. And this is big for me. This is something that I think really has an impact on the quality of play, B, what happens in divisions that aren't as high as the Junior B League, and just sort of the way that players are sort of moved around and how they are sort of plucked from teams. So one being that we just need way more weekday games inside the division. Having all these games piled into Saturday and Sunday, I don't think it makes any sense for anyone. Refs, teams, players, it doesn't work, and it doesn't benefit anyone. Guys don't, as a player, you don't want to be playing games like 12 hours apart all the time, like playing on Saturday at 8 o'clock and then playing on Sunday at 5 or whatever it ends up being isn't great for physically or mentally, especially when you're playing, like, I don't know, there's been examples this year where teams have played 7:30 in Edmonton and then played at like 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock the next day in Calgary. Doesn't make any sense. Something that needs to change. And then the other issue with that is if you play more weekday games, you have way less conflict. Like you could go and schedule tier 2 and tier 1 on completely separate days. So guys aren't consistently getting poached from these tier 2 teams. Like my tier 2 team, for example, 3/5 of our power play aren't there half the time because these, tier 1 teams are taking them and calling them up. So, and then we also, I know from personal experience, we lost a couple guys full time. They got rostered early in the season. Now scheduling wouldn't help with that. But there are ways to do this. And I just think it would be so much better for everyone if things like that got sorted out and we started playing games more so, because it used to be that way. We used to have way more games during the week. And I think that would go a long way in helping, everyone have their players available, and B, space the schedule out more so you don't have all these games condensed into one area or one part of the week. Keenan, you got any sort of opinions on that?
For the penalty side of things, I think there's teams that are looking very strong on that penalty kill and just playing very disciplined lacrosse. I don't have much else to add to that. It is interesting, though, to see some of the disparities between some of these teams. As for the scheduling side, I agree. I believe midweek games within the division would honestly, it just keeps the flow of games going. I mean, you've always got something to watch that way. So I do agree on maybe we can try next year scheduling some games in the middle of the week interdivision, because honestly, I'm always down for lacrosse every day of the week.
Yeah, I think teams, fans, players, everybody involved, coaching staffs, I think everybody involved would benefit from, just games being spaced out a little bit better and especially having that tier 1 and tier 2 dichotomy, playing on different nights, so there isn't those affiliation issues. I just think that those are pretty easy fixes that we can sort of attend to. Now, with that being said, let's get to the power rankings. And I'm going to start up at the top because that's a lot more obvious, and then I'll work my way down and I'll explain why I'm going with what I'm going with. So up at the top, you got the Shamrocks still with only one loss on the season. They did fall to the Blizzard last weekend. They're going to stay up at one. I think they probably play the most disciplined lacrosse. Their special teams are usually very good. I'm going to get to see them for the first time in person here this weekend. So I've always been very impressed with what they run on their power play. And like I said, they just do a good job of attending to the smaller things, the finer details of the game. And they're going to stay at one for now. Silver Tips are two. They or I guess they suffered their second loss of the season at the Mavericks on Sunday, but they're going to stay at two. Nobody really has the resume to pass them. They actually move up from three because I did have the Warriors last week, so they'll go up to two. The Kings, with an impressive 3 wins on the weekend at home, they take advantage of a shorthanded Warriors team. And again, they're another team with a very good power play and some high-end skill that really helps them get through games. Number 4, the Rampage. They did lose at the Fort on Sunday. That did not shock me that they dropped that game. It did sort of surprise me that they blew the lead, but the Rebels are playing a lot better. They're getting guys back and they're getting stronger. So I don't really subtract too much, or I don't detract too much from the Rampage for losing that game, although, that was probably one they would have wanted to have. They'll stay at 4, and then at 5, this is probably the hardest decision all year. You can make a case, really, for the Warriors, the Rebels, and the Mavericks, all at the 5 spot. The Warriors and the Mavericks, both great home teams. Okay, the Rebels probably, they're definitely better at home. I don't know if their discrepancy between home and road is as big, but all 3 teams much better at home. Now, part of me wants to slide the Rebels in here at 5. But I don't want to be a prisoner to the standings, because what's the point of giving power rankings if you're just gonna be the ultimate decision or the ultimate decider is who's sitting up above in the standings right now? I still am gonna go with the Warriors at 5, even though you could make a real strong case for the Rebels or the Mavericks. I want to see what happens with all their guys in the lineup, because every time they are in the lineup, they do pretty well. So this next little stretch of games is going to be telling, but really right now you could honestly put the Rebels or the Mavericks in here at 5. The Warriors, though, I'm going to go with them just because they've shown it time and time again. They've been to the last 2 founders, and until I see otherwise, I'm going to keep them inside the top 5. So they're going to sit at 5. Keenen, your power rankings.
Yeah, thanks, Mo. My top 5, I don't know. I had a little bit of struggles, and I know you said about being a slave to the to the standings. But personally, I'm thinking I'm going to be a bit of a slave to the standings. I agree with you. Shamrock Silvertips 1-2. I mean, there's no competing against those 2 teams at the moment. They're just looking strong on both sides of the ball. This is where I start to get off a little bit, is the Rebel. I have the Rebels at 3. A new entry to the top 5 for me. However, I think they looked really strong this last weekend, and you could argue that, yes, you could put a team like the Kings, the Warriors, Mavericks up in 3, but I feel the Rebels have something clicking right now, and I'm curious to see how it goes through the rest of the season. At number 4, I have the Kings. Kings, again, they look strong with that 3-game sweep of the Warriors, and like you said earlier, they did have a lot of players out and affiliates and all that, but the Kings they're very hard to beat in the East. I think they're better than the Shamrocks and Silvertips? No. Better than the Rebels? Maybe. So 3 and 4 could switch around a little bit. And at 5, I have the Mavericks. The Mavericks taking down the Silvertips for practically the first time the Silvertips have lost this year. I know it's their second loss. But to be one of those ones that says that you've taken out the division leaders, That's something big to boast about. So, Shamrock, Silvertips, Rebels, Kings, Mavericks, my top 5. Moving into the performers of the week. Well, you mentioned it earlier, 2 players, and I think you read my mind. Carter Grace and Hildebrand. Grace with 4 goals, 2 assists in 2 games, 4 goals, 1 assist. 12-goal outing in the weekend, 5 assists that weekend. Just absolutely solid in that set against the SWAT. And Hildebrand, 5 goals, 1 assist in the 9-5 victory against the Silvertips. Come on, man. You're involved in 6 of your 9 goals. That's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So, very, very impressive on Grace and Hildebrand, your Junior Beast performers of the week. And looking ahead to your Week 8 schedule here on Crowlax TV, starting Friday night at Ken Nickel Regional Recreation Center, 7:30, Miners visiting the Outlaws, that Senior B matchup. Rampage visiting the Crude, Friday, 8 p.m., Jerome McGinley Arena. Moving into Saturday, the Chill coming up north for a meeting with the Outlaws, 3 p.m., Ken Nickel. And at 4 p.m. on Saturday at Moyer Recreation Center, the Senior B Mounties visiting the Rebels. Directly after that game at 7 p.m., also in the Moyer, the Saskatchewan SWAT coming out west for a matchup with the Rebels, 7 p.m., that game time once again. That big game to circle on your calendar, Saturday, 7 p.m. at the Bill Hunter, the Shamrocks coming up north to visit the Warriors. Going to be an absolute fire barn burner. Excited for that one. Sunday afternoon, the SWAT then heading to Bill Hunter themselves for a 12:30 p.m. matchup against the Warriors. Silvertips coming up north to face the Rebels Sunday 2 p.m. at Moyer Recreation Center. Also Sunday 2 p.m. the Shamrocks and the Crude in Jerome McGinley Arena. Sunday at 3 p.m. at Ken Nickel Regional Recreation Center, the Senior B Mounties and the Outlaws. And then on Sunday to wrap up the weekend, 5:30 p.m., the Mavericks visiting the Outlaws at the Ken Nickel Regional Recreation Center. Well, for my co-host Muhammad, you can find him on X at MJ_9 or on Instagram, m.joma. Make sure to reach out to him if you have anything you want to talk, even if you just want to talk lacrosse. He is always down for that. You can reach out to me on Instagram and X at CrowlaxTV. Thank you so much for tuning in to the mid-season show, and we will see you next week.